When we talk about anger, most people assume it is a problem to be eliminated, a destructive fire that must be stamped out at all costs. But if you look closely, anger is not the enemy. It is a signal. It is a messenger carrying information about your inner state and the world around you. The difficulty arises when you confuse the message for a command. Anger is not meant to dictate your actions. It is meant to alert you to something that needs attention. And the failure to make this distinction is what causes so much unnecessary suffering. Think of it this way: if you put your hand on a hot stove, the pain that shoots through your body isn't the problem. It's the warning system. Without that pain, you'd leave your hand on the stove and suffer far worse consequences. Anger functions in the same way in the psychological realm. It points to injustice, to disrespect, to boundaries being violated. But here's the difference. Pain tells you to pull your hand away immediately, while anger tempts you to lash out immediately. And in that temptation lies the danger, because unlike the stove, people and circumstances are far more complex than simple withdrawal can solve. Philosophically, you could say anger exposes the fault lines in your values. It reveals where you care most deeply and where your sense of order has been disrupted. If someone insults you, your anger doesn't simply arise because of the insult. It arises because you interpret that insult as an attack on your dignity, your worth, or your place in the social hierarchy. If your child disobeys you, your anger isn't only about the disobedience. It's about your fear of losing control, your concern for their future, and the meaning you attach to your role as a parent. In this sense, anger is less about the surface event and more about the meaning you assign to it. But here is where things become dangerous. If you mistake anger for the truth, if you allow it to be your master instead of your messenger, you become enslaved to it. You hand over the steering wheel of your life to a volatile, short-lived emotion. Anger narrows your vision. It blinds you to nuance. It whispers in your ear that violence, retaliation, or harsh words are the only solutions. And if you obey, you may gain a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but you will almost always pay a longer-term price: broken trust, damaged relationships, guilt, and regret. This is why it is essential to train yourself to pause and interpret anger before you act on it. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What value is being threatened? Is this response aligned with the kind of person I aspire to be? These questions transform anger from a destructive force into a source of insight. Instead of being driven by it, you learn from it. And in doing so, you grow stronger, not weaker. Modern psychology echoes this truth. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that emotions are not facts, they are interpretations. Neuroscience shows that anger activates the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, but that activation can be regulated by the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought. In other words, biology has given you the tools to feel anger without being controlled by it. The question is whether you will choose to use those tools. And this is not merely a matter of emotional management, it is a moral issue. To be governed by anger is to abdicate responsibility for your actions. It is to allow circumstance and instinct to dictate the kind of person you are. But to see anger as a messenger is to reclaim responsibility. It is to say, I will listen to what this feeling has to teach me, but I will not let it enslave me. That choice is the essence of maturity, of strength, and of character. So when anger rises within you, do not fear it, do not deny it, do not blindly obey it. Step back, look it in the eye, and ask what truth it carries. Then decide with clarity and responsibility how you will act, because anger, when recognized as a messenger, can lead to understanding, courage, and even justice. But when mistaken for a master, it will lead you only into chaos and destruction. Remember, this anger is not your master. It is your messenger. The choice of whether to listen wisely or react blindly is always yours. One of the most dangerous features of anger is how fast it moves. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for rational thought to catch up. It surges through you like lightning, demanding immediate action. And in that instant, you feel almost powerless to resist. Words slip out of your mouth before you've even thought them. Your hands clench, your voice rises, and suddenly, you're no longer speaking with intention, you're speaking with raw instinct. That's why people say things in anger they later regret, because they gave anger the keys to the car and let it drive them straight into a wall. The greatest antidote to this danger is the pause. The pause is the space between stimulus and response. It is the moment in which you reclaim control from the emotional storm. And though it sounds deceptively simple, it's one of the hardest disciplines to master because everything in your body screams at you to act. But strength is not revealed in speed. It is revealed in restraint. The pause is not weakness. It is the ultimate demonstration of power, because it proves you are capable of choosing how you respond instead of being dragged along by instinct. Now, why is this pause so important? Because anger narrows your vision. It collapses the complexity of reality into a single demand and fight back. But life is never that simple. The pause gives you time to reopen your perspective. It creates a window in which your higher faculties, reason, reflection, conscience, can enter the conversation. Without that window, you are little more than an animal reacting to threat. With it, you are a human being capable of transforming emotion into wisdom. Think of the pause like the difference between an amateur and a master in martial arts. The amateur reacts instantly to provocation, flailing with uncontrolled energy. The master, by contrast, waits, measures, observes. He doesn't rush. He creates space, and in that space he sees openings the amateur cannot. His calmness is not passivity. It is a weapon because it allows him to act with precision rather than chaos. The same principle applies to anger. The pause is the move of the master. This is where psychology and philosophy intersect. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose, and in our choice lies our growth and our freedom. That statement is not just poetic, it's profoundly true. Every time you pause before responding to anger, you are strengthening the part of you that is free. You are reminding yourself that you are not a slave to emotion, that you are capable of living by principle rather than impulse. Of course, creating this pause is not automatic. It requires practice. It may begin with something as simple as taking a breath, counting to 5, or walking away from the situation. At first, it may feel artificial, even forced, but over time, you build a habit, and what begins as discipline eventually becomes second nature. Neuroscience supports this. Deliberate self-regulation strengthens the pathways in the brain that allow you to manage emotions more effectively. In other words, the more you practice the pause, the easier it becomes to hold it. Some people fear that pausing means suppressing anger, bottling it up until it explodes later. But that is not what I am suggesting. Suppression is denial, the pause is recognition. Suppression says, I feel nothing. The pause says, I feel everything, but I will not be ruled by it. There is a world of difference between the two. Suppression weakens you while the pause strengthens you. And here's the remarkable thing. When you learn to pause, you often discover that the anger you felt so strongly just moments before doesn't even demand the same kind of reaction anymore. The intensity fades. What seemed urgent suddenly looks less important. You realize that silence, restraint, or a measured response accomplishes far more than shouting ever could. The pause not only protects your relationships, it preserves your dignity. So the next time anger surges through you, remember, speed is the enemy of wisdom. Do not let anger rush you into decisions that compromise your integrity. Slow down, breathe, wait, create that sacred gap between what has been done to you and how you will respond. Because in that pause, you discover your true strength. The pause is not weakness. It is the proof that you, and not your anger, are in control. One of the most destructive things anger does to us is distort the story we tell ourselves about what happened. The angry mind is quick to assign blame. They disrespected me. They humiliated me. They caused this. The narrative is always outward pointing, and in that projection lies the trap. Because if the problem is always them, then the solution must also be them. You've handed over responsibility for your state of being to someone else. And in that moment, without realizing it, you've become powerless. The truth is, anger thrives on blame. It feeds on the idea that you are a victim of someone else's choices, that your peace of mind depends on their behavior. But once you believe that, you are chained to them. They pull one string, and you react. They poke one wound, and you bleed. That is not freedom, it's servitude. And it's a form of servitude we willingly enter every time we cling to blame. But what if you flip the narrative? What if, instead of saying, they made me angry, you ask, why did I respond with anger? What responsibility do I have in this moment? Suddenly the ground shifts. You are no longer a victim of their actions. You are a participant in your own response. That doesn't mean excusing their behavior. It doesn't mean denying that wrong was done, but it does mean reclaiming authority over how you choose to interpret and act in response. This is one of the most profound shifts a person can make, because blame is easy, responsibility is hard. Blame says, I am righteous, they are guilty. Responsibility says, I cannot control them, but I can control myself. And that second statement is infinitely more powerful because it hands you back the steering wheel of your life. Philosophically, this is the difference between resentment and responsibility. Resentment locks you into a story where you are helplessly wronged. It breeds bitterness and perpetuates anger long after the event is over. Responsibility, on the other hand, opens the door to transformation. It allows you to take ownership of your emotional life, to choose responses aligned with your values instead of dictated by your wounds. And that choice is what separates maturity from immaturity, strength from weakness. Now, this doesn't mean you'll never feel anger again. It doesn't mean you won't encounter injustice, betrayal, or disrespect. Those are unavoidable parts of life. But it does mean you will stop letting those experiences dictate who you become. Because the moment you move from blame to responsibility, you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What does this demand from me? How should I act, not just to protect myself, but to build myself into something stronger?" Psychologically, this shift is backed by evidence. Research on resilience shows that people who take responsibility for their emotions, even in situations beyond their control, recover faster from stress and trauma. They are not naive. They simply understand that while they cannot govern the world, they can govern themselves. And governing yourself is the essence of freedom. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone insults you publicly. The blame narrative says, "They humiliated me, they ruined my reputation," and so you lash out, escalating the conflict. But the responsibility narrative says, "They attempted to humiliate me, but my dignity is not theirs to give or take. My response determines whether I maintain my integrity or abandon it." Do you see the difference? One leaves you enslaved to their words. The other puts you firmly in command of yourself. This is not about being passive. It's not about letting others walk all over you. It's about choosing your battles wisely, refusing to let every slight or offense drag you into chaos. When you act from responsibility instead of blame, you still confront wrongs, but you do so from a position of strength rather than weakness. You stop fighting just to discharge anger, and you start acting to uphold your values. And so, whenever anger arises, watch the story you are telling yourself. If it is filled with blame, recognize that you are surrendering power. If it is infused with responsibility, recognize that you are building strength. Responsibility transforms anger from a destructive fire into a disciplined force. It allows you to act in ways that create order, rather than deepen chaos. So the next time you feel anger boiling up, pause and ask, am I blaming, or am I taking responsibility? Because the answer to that question will determine whether you stay enslaved to your emotions or rise above them. Blame is easy, but it leaves you weak. Responsibility is hard, but it makes you unshakable. Choose responsibility. When people think about controlling anger, they often imagine two extremes, either exploding and letting it all out, or suppressing it and pretending it isn't there. Both approaches are dangerous. Unchecked anger burns everything in its path: friendships, marriages, careers. Suppressed anger, on the other hand, doesn't disappear, it festers. It leaks out in bitterness, sarcasm, cold withdrawal, or sudden eruptions at the wrong time. Neither path leads to strength. The real task is to take the raw energy of anger and channel it into something meaningful. Anger is at its core energy. It is passion, intensity, urgency. And like all energy, it has to go somewhere. If you let it spill uncontrolled, it becomes destructive. But if you harness it, if you guide it with discipline and purpose, it can become one of the most powerful forces for transformation in your life. Think about it: almost every great social movement, every act of courage in the face of injustice, every refusal to bow to tyranny has been fueled, at least in part, by righteous anger. Without it, we would accept every abuse, every insult, every chain. Anger reminds us that something is wrong and needs to change. But without discipline, that same anger can turn you into the very thing you despise. This is why channeled anger is so vital. Instead of screaming at your children, you take that energy and use it to create structure, discipline, and clarity in your household. Instead of lashing out at your partner, you use that same energy to communicate boundaries clearly and to stand firm on your values. Instead of punching the wall when life is unfair, you use that energy to work harder, train your body, sharpen your skills, or build something that no one can take away from you. Anger, redirected properly, becomes fuel for excellence. Philosophically, you could say anger is a neutral force like fire. Fire can destroy your home, but it can also heat it. It can burn a forest to ashes, or it can clear the ground for new growth. The difference lies in whether you direct it or let it rage uncontrolled. Discipline is the container that makes fire useful, and discipline, when applied to anger, transforms it from an enemy into an ally. Psychology supports this too. Studies show that when people channel anger into goal-directed action, rather than venting or suppressing, it often leads to increased motivation, persistence, and problem-solving ability. Anger sharpens focus. It pushes you to confront issues you might otherwise avoid. But again, this only works if you are in control of it, not the other way around. Let me give you an example. Imagine being overlooked at work for a promotion you deserve. The uncontrolled response is to lash out at your boss, gossip about your colleagues, or sink into resentment. The suppressed response is to smile on the outside while rotting on the inside. But the channeled response is to let that anger fuel your determination, to sharpen your competence, to raise your standards, to build such undeniable value that you cannot be ignored. One path leaves you weaker, the other makes you formidable. And here's another truth: people respect controlled strength. They may fear uncontrolled rage, but they do not trust it. The person who can stand firm, who can express intensity without losing control, is someone others naturally look to for leadership. That's why the ability to channel anger is not just a personal skill, it's a social force. It builds credibility, it creates stability, it shows that you can be trusted with power because you are not mastered by your own emotions. So when anger rises, ask yourself, what can I build with this energy? What can I improve, protect, or create? How can I turn this surge of emotion into something that leaves me stronger, not weaker? These questions turn anger into a tool. They keep you from wasting it on destruction when it could be the very thing that propels you forward. Do not fear your anger, and do not suppress it. Master it. Direct it. Let it fuel your courage, your discipline, and your pursuit of what is right. Because when anger is channeled into purpose, it ceases to be a liability. It becomes a weapon of transformation. Raw anger destroys. Disciplined anger builds. Choose to build.